the Warriors for Peace podcast, exploring the cultivation and manifestation of warriorship, courageous peacemaking, interconnection, and deep healing. I'm Sally Chang, your host. I'm a Taiwanese American queer woman living in Oakland, California with my wife. I'm an acupuncturist and chief instructor of Evergreen Taiji Academy, where we learn about internal cultivation and the healing arts. I am super excited to introduce you to my guests today, Sam Taitel and Serian Leti Strauss. All three of us are longtime devoted martial artists in different styles and lineages, and have been taking a deep dive internally and outwardly in dismantling racism, reckoning with social inequities, as well as healing and restoring our shared humanity. I want to invite both of my guests today to introduce themselves in their own words. We could have Serian come on the line and tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Serian Leti Strauss. Love that you've added my middle name that's unofficial. I go by she, her pronouns, and Leti means warrior. So I'm very honored to be here representing my ancestry and my lineage. I am half Tanzanian, half American, Black woman, queer, born and raised in Tanzania, East Africa, came to the United States at the age of 18. I hold second degree black belt in Kajukenbo here in Oakland, California at Hand to Hand, Kajukenbo Self-Defense Center, under the phenomenal leadership of Chief Head Instructor, Professor Sonia Richardson. I am also a coach. I am a facilitator of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I am the co-director of the self-defense program at Hand to Hand, and I'm very honored to be here.
Welcome, welcome. And Sam, please, I invite you into the space.
Hi, folks. Sally, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm super excited to talk with Serian and you more. As Sally said, my name is Sam Taitel, and for pronouns, I use she or they. I personally started officially practicing Aikido in 1999 when I was 5. I'm a Sandan now, meaning third degree black belt. And since I started so young, being a martial artist has always been really central to my development and identity. It's been forefront in helping me explore and understand my other identities, including being a mixed person, Black, queer, Jewish, just to name a few. And right now I'm working as a community liaison to help people from different backgrounds practice perspective taking and participate in open communication to plan a path forward based on values rather than maybe meeting goals or a really set path, because we don't know what's happening yet. And this is reflected right now in the de-escalation workshop that I'm offering in collaboration with a friend. Obviously, there is still a lot of work to do.
All right. Thank you both for joining me here and making the time to join in this conversation. So just to set the context here, just a few weeks ago was the PAMA Camp 2020. So that was all online for the first time. PAMA is the Pacific Association for Women Martial Artists. And every year they do an in-person camp. But of course, since it's 2020 and nothing is as it was, everything was online. And since it's 2020, and there's been so much dysregulation and disruption of our lives, our health, our concepts of safety and social justice, they invited us and also other members of PAMA to be on a panel discussion talking about race, racism, equity, and martial artists. And what does that have to do with anything?
So much.
It was so cool. Yeah. PAMA was awesome because if it wasn't virtual, I don't think I would have been able to attend. I'm in the Midwest right now in Minneapolis, and PAMA is on the West Coast. So it's just, I think, a community that I've been able to discover in a new way, thanks to COVID. I mean, trying to see the silver lining.
Yeah, it's been a mix, lots of things, hasn't it? Has disrupted our feeling of normal in so many different ways. And so we've had to clarify our values, what we want to stand up for. And so on this panel, it was 90 minutes, just an hour and a half, with 6 people, 6 super interesting people on the panel. And then the members also adding in their questions to the discussion. And I think we all felt that we were just getting warmed up with that conversation before, boom, time was up.
Absolutely.
It was a blink of an eye.
Oh my, yeah, it was really fast.
So going back to where we left off at the PAMA discussion, we were talking about the difference between martial arts and self-defense, and police brutality has been a huge topic of our awareness. A lot of people waking up to that experience, a lot of people having a lot of history with that experience, and the recognition that different people are treated differently, different appearing people on the surface, different bodies are treated with different standards of care with the police. And so as martial artists, not everybody who's listening to this is a martial artist. What is it about our work that we do as martial artists that is different than, say, just martial training? Because most police are trained in martial skills. Soldiers are trained in martial skills, necessary, valid, that's part of the job, and it's appropriate. So what's the appropriate use of power and understanding of those martial relationships? And what's the difference in the dojo, in the guan, in our arts? Serian, do you have something to say about that?
So much to say. First of all, I just want to say that it's the first time that I've been thinking about this for many, many years. And it's the first time I've had a platform to start to voice some of those things, that thinking. And so some of it is imperfect. And so just want to name that. I think about why I train. What is for me the difference between martial arts and self-defense in my body and how I train? And when you say that martial arts has been, used historically in present day to train fighters, militia, all those things, I think about why I train, and I have a very, very strict code of ethics that I have when I salute my partner and say, I'm engaging in my martial arts training. And I think of it, and that's why I said it's a meditation of fighting. So I'm fighting. There's a set of agreements, there's a set of rules, there's hierarchy, and we can talk about the pros and cons of that. But I also have this respect for my teachers and what those rules are. And so as a self-defense instructor, I think why I believe just training in martial arts as a militia is slightly dangerous, actually, is that having a self-defense lens, for me, automatically, because you're thinking about violence, you automatically, for me, think about systems of oppression, because violence does not happen outside that vacuum. So then who are you in your body, and how do you take up space in the world, and how does your force impact others, is then the critical analysis for me. So when I think of defense for Black lives, I think of self-defense. I don't think of martial arts. For me, for some reason, the things that I embody is the strength and the power and the alignment and the spiritual connection that I have from my martial arts training, my agreement that is based on mutual respect and understanding, versus going into the other realm where those rules are society's rules. So that there's a different container. And so I am not training to be a militia. I'm not training. That's not my present day context. I'm training to be more myself, to be fully me, to be embodied, to be aligned, to be in a learning mindset, to be more connected to community in a different way, and to understand myself better and understand community better. Myself as a self-defense instructor and practitioner is I then put the context of the world. And that's just the way that I personally hold it in order to make sense of, what's being used force right now as martial arts for me. That's not martial arts. That's violence. That's straight up, oppression. That's straight up.
What are you thinking in your mind? What do you see in your mind?
I see someone who does not respect another body to such an extent, and does not respect the life of another body to the extent that they're able to take it. Now, for me, that is pathology. I didn't look at any of the videos. I couldn't do it. I did not want to see another Black life taken. I couldn't. Eric Gardner, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it because what has to happen in a person's body to do that is so horrifying to me. And then that we're using, things that we do in our punch attacks. I'm just for me, that's not martial arts. It's not self-defense. It's something else. It's the context and why we have self-defense, Why I teach self-defense is because that exists. That type of oppression exists.
Right.
That exists, and therefore I need to understand violence. I need to understand how systems of oppression operate so that I can support those who walk through the world thinking that they're defective, think that there's something wrong with them, that think that they are not worth protecting, that narrative switches up and saying, there's nothing wrong with you. The system is busted. The system is wrong. And so
also,
I can go on, but I'll stop there for a second. But because it's just bringing up so much emotion for me.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I find it really scary and hard when, with that police brutality, you run into this double bind of, okay, if I fight back, I get hurt and injured. If I don't fight back, I also get hurt and injured. And in both those instances, possibly murdered. And so just like Serian said, I totally don't see the map from police brutality, the choke that we may practice that is also put on another individual, a human, that can end their life. There isn't that overlap for me. My friend Floral put it really well. I think self-defense and martial arts are this Venn diagram, and the more we practice and train, the more we discern the pieces of that Venn diagram, maybe the less they overlap, but that takes a lot, because a lot of people, when uncomfortable or just in a situation, perceive threat and harm kind of mutually. And it may not always be physically like a threat to your life or harm. And so martial arts has helped me study really the lead up. It helps me extend that time before the violence to understand it, to interact and engage before that point where, yes, self-defense is totally necessary, but also pushing off that barrier and hopefully, obviously, not reaching that point. And which is why I think martial arts can offer a great venue for people to unpack and understand their own internal reactions, because when noticing that in your body, that threat of harm it's very visceral. And so to be able to regulate that and understand it, and then also notice it in other people and interact with it, that's where I think martial arts comes in.
Just bouncing off what you're saying about threat. Threat isn't just one thing. Threat isn't always existential.
Yeah.
So sometimes we can't differentiate. If we're triggered and we're caught in reactivity, we can't discern, like, if threat is existential, you're going to respond in one way. It's like, is my life at stake versus is my pride at stake?
Yeah.
Versus is my parking lot at stake? It's just like, are you fighting for a parking space at the grocery store? Or is somebody threatening your life? And it just seems like right now in this moment, everything is so inflamed and escalated. We just aren't able to discern en masse, like as a culture right now, because of poor leadership and a lot of other reasons. We aren't able to discern subtleties and the layers of meaning and intent and the realness of the situation. And I think that's part of the art form and the skill of martial arts. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, that totally connects back to police brutality, the why of it. Why are you applying that choke when it is no threat to you for that person to walk away if they've done nothing else? Like, you can find them, identify them. There are so many ways now of, is it your pride? Like, what are you upholding? It's that pack of cigarettes, or you thought you saw, like, it was Skittles. Just the examples go on and on of what threat was it, and then it's hard to be removed as an individual. And then at some point, right, the police uphold the state, and kind of what community are you serving? And the fact that, say, more police officers haven't just refused to interact in certain situations, that mob mentality where you lose yourself, really truly lose yourself. Martial arts, I feel like, is the practice that more people need to engage in to find themselves again, and like find themselves, engage with community while maintaining themselves, because those barriers we practice all the time, how to construct barriers, take down barriers, where to put up barriers where it's necessary. And this is a dance we constantly do. But that's why police brutality is so different to me, because it's maintaining a status quo that many folks agree is just harmful to those that exist within it on so many levels.
I'm thinking about what we train in our bodies as martial artists and what what's changed in me over time, and what I'm seeing when you're talking about safety, really having a good sense of what bodies are trained to feel safe when and how and why. And certain bodies, I'm going to just say from doing more work with a mixed range of folks, certain privileged bodies have that sense of safety, of like lack of safety and discomfort are really, like you said, Sally, and I think Sam, you said also, are just really conflated. Like they're together. And that how can we sit with being uncomfortable? How do we train being uncomfortable? I mean, that's been my training for, almost 2 decades now in martial arts, is that how do I train, even in sparring, which used to be so scary to me, just being like, well, I actually am safe right now. I've made an agreement with my partner. I get to ask for what I need. Let me try out this thing. Let me push myself a little further. Okay, now that didn't feel so safe. I get to ask for what I need. Or was I really feeling safe or not feeling safe? So we get to live in these places of discomfort very often and get comfortable with discomfort and get, expand in discomfort, where the world doesn't operate that way, where discomfort and safety often get conflated, and therefore understanding the way systems of oppression work on our bodies and our sense of safety can be really helpful in terms of what are we asking people to do? Like when we talk about the police and the mob mentality and all, we're asking people to go against something that's happening in their bodies also, that they're not actually trained very well to do.
Yeah. And naming why that's so important and dangerous, because when uncomfortability and lack of safety is conflated, we exist in like an able-bodied white supremacist kind of upholding society.
Absolutely.
So when white people mostly feel unsafe, right? And maybe that is just uncomfortability. And because of how we've been raised and socialized and indoctrinated, that's when, Black and brown bodies are at risk, lives are taken. And so kind of really trying to reach, obviously, like certain folks, to turn this all on its head is so critical, because I don't want your uncomfortability to be a risk to my life.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah,
right.
That's
Absolutely.
what it comes down to.
And Sam, you and I talked about that right after PAMA around like, I am trained to pick up on white discomfort because it has been critical to my safety.
Yeah.
And so how do I, as a Black body, also build my capacity to handle white uncomfortability has been my healing journey during this time of COVID, of how do I jump? Who do I center? How do I move in my world to make sure white people aren't uncomfortable? And I have been so heartbroken by how I am organized. I'm heartbroken by who I center and why. And it's been this real, since you're talking about healing, Sally, it's been an incredible healing journey for me to unpack that.
I just want to emphasize what you're saying about people who are not centered in society. We live in a white-bodied centric supremacist society. So it's just like, call it what it is. That means everything, all the structures and systems are propping that up. And so people who are not in the center of that system and structure are constantly at the surface of it. And it takes an incredible amount of energy. That's what I hear you saying, Serian. Like all your life, I feel this all of my life. I've been in the service and I feel highly sensitized and trained to centralize and take care of and to nurture and to carry, to help white bodies feel comfortable and safe and secure, and to make them feel like they're good people.
Yeah.
So that's another critical aspect of the mind control, is that these behaviors and systems existed before all of us existed, right? We didn't invent them. We inherited them, no matter what kind of body you were born into. But we have all been trained to uphold the system. It takes time to untrain and to find something else that is more humanizing and where we can exist as whole people within a culture.
It feels really, right, one-sided, kind of where we've been approaching this, and even Serian saying through this COVID time of have a better capacity for making people uncomfortable and dealing with that. And this hand holding, right? It's labor, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Just going back and asking, why are you not thinking about why you're uncomfortable and trying to be comfortable with that discomfort? Why is it me like pandering to your safety to thereby ensure I'm safe when I'm still not safe? And that's infuriating and really hard. So that's kind of what I've been working on and unpacking. And there's this push and pull where we're still like leading in this work, but I'm trying not to make it one-sided. Like, we all have work to do. And I hear a lot also, I've spoken about generational trauma, right? And how it exists in our bodies, is passed down in our behaviors. But that's also generational brutality and oppression. And when you're brought up in these ways, it's normal. And we're trying to point to the fact that it's not normal. And after George Floyd's murder, that woke a lot of folks up, but it was horrendous, but not surprising to the people on the other side of that experience. It's more just, wow, that's where we're at. And how do I respond to this? Am I going to really make sure the folks around me are comfortable to make sure I'm okay? And I may not be okay. Yeah. Or do I push back and risk myself, risk my spirit, risk my body to try to show and highlight that this isn't normal, or in a society, in a world where we can all flourish? Yeah. Just want to say again what Serian said, I'm heartbroken by who I center and why. Just making yourself the center is the kindest thing you can do, because from that grounded and stable center place, you can reach out and connect authentically with others rather than wearing this mask, which is heavy and burdensome.
Yeah.
That's really what I've been doing to such a degree that I've lost relationships, I've lost friendships. And yes, it's 100,000% worth it. It's this place where I'm like, okay, I'm in the center here. Here I hold myself strong. Here I'm not refusing to be anything less. I mean, it's true. I think, I can't remember, Sally, if you or Sam said that this thing, do I continue sort of this illusion, or do I stand up and risk something, right? And I am at the place where the illusion is too toxic. I can't continue in that direction anymore. My body can't do it. My spirit can't do it. My mind can't do it. And therefore, this being myself and fully me and really unpacking this is my only option. And what I'm noticing about white supremacy, white body supremacy, is it's so tricky. Here I am centering me, and then one little thing will come in and I'll be like, oh, dang, I centered whiteness there. Like, what? I've been trained. I've been trained so well. But now I can smell it. Now I can see it come in these really subtle, tricky, slippery, sneaky ways. So I think it's just going to be an ongoing process for me.
Yeah, it's a lifelong commitment to waking up, practicing something different and moving forward in the world and divesting in that reality, divesting in the system that has been oppressive, being willing to be a creative person, a healing practiced person. All three of us are in healing arts and have martial arts as part of our own self-healing. I think it's really important to claim that space, to not get involved, or at least find and nourish and cultivate a way back to our self-connection and our humanity. What Sam was touching in on about being one-sided, and also what Serian, what you were saying, just points to the dehumanization of this whole exercise of racism, and that it injures all the parties involved. What does that do to the person who is centered and has all the unearned advantages? There's dehumanization of that person, even though they might live a more comfortable life. They're also being robbed of the maturing process of being fully human, of connecting with all other living beings, of connecting with their own selves, even their uncomfortable selves. We learn so much through discomfort, through being challenged, through being confused, through illness and injury. As martial artists, we know this. Like, if you win all the time, if you've got all the trophies and all the gold medals and you've won every contest, you're not a mature martial artist. I'm imagining that all three of us has some down periods in our lives where we have felt not on top of our game. We haven't felt powerful. We've been injured. I've had major illnesses and injuries in my life. And I've learned so much about resilience, internal connection, internal value, internal power, and restorative power, regenerative power. Through that, I can't be fully angry at God or the universe or whatever you want to call it for raining that kind of pain down on me, because I'm a different person on the other side of it.
Yeah, it's totally embracing a new you, accepting where you're not going to go anymore, how your path has turned, and that flexibility, adaptability to exist right in the moment. When you spoke, I first thought of COVID, and I think this is a slump for a lot of folks right now. But even in my training, specifically after I had a bad motorcycle accident, was, okay, you'll never, if walking would be a good thing right now. And I was in my younger 20s. And so that kind of halt to being really athletic and finding that joy and flow in movement, and then maybe thinking that was never going to be in my future because I'm very body centric. I'm working on my brain, but it's a scary place. So how do you reach a person that has that privilege, isn't at immediate risk? How do you help them notice where they're stunted and why that isn't a benefit to the communities that they're a part of? It's really easy to dig in your heels and to put on blinders. So
yeah, eventually when society just encourages and enforces that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that claiming our own dignity and value and space, our right to inhabit our full bodies and to not shrink up just standing in our own bodies fully manifested, is an act of rebellion.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great question, because I feel like my work is both supporting those with white body privilege to move, and also supporting people of color to fully embody. I live in this, I'm mixed race, so it shouldn't be a surprise to me that I kind of live in the crack there, a little bit, where that seems to be what I'm being drawn to right now. And the experience in COVID that I'm noticing happening is people are no longer able to be asleep. There's something around these conditions. But what I'm also noticing is people's waking up to their impact, waking up to how they take up space and how injurious they have been, and really wanting to be different and having absolutely no clue how to do it.
Yeah, paying more attention to the impact, because you can have a really excellent intent and the impact of it can be incredibly injurious. It sounds like you've worked with that with some of your people, Serian, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you talk about that?
Again, I come back to the body. And I'm noticing with my client, very few, I take on very few white clients, I can only have a few, and who are very, very committed. I'm like, you're not committed. I have no time for you.
It's not easy work. This isn't just
This is not easy work. This is a lot of labor on my part. Pay me and you're going to show up. And when I ask you to do something, you're going to do it. So I am insisting on staying embodied. How do you name what's actually happening in your body? So if you were trying to do something well, which we all have done, and then have a negative impact and cause harm, what are you feeling? What's going on for you? And how do you tolerate that so that you don't jump into defending your intent? Because you're right. You can have all the great intent in the world, and our whole country, we could say, was built on good intent and has lots of harm, although I don't know if the intent was good,
Was not built on good
not
intent.
good, but there's people who are going along with it thinking that all the people who are going along with it are thinking that this is good stuff, the intent.
Well, that's the mythology. It's the
myth. Yeah. Absolutely. So the embodiment is the reality.
Yeah.
And so then
say that again.
the embodiment is the reality.
Yeah. That brings it into the earth plane.
Absolutely.
It's like, it's not your thought, it's not abstracted, it's not inert or neutral.
No.
It manifests in the flesh.
Absolutely. Because the flesh, then, if you can align in your flesh, if you can embody what you actually want in that moment, what do you want to do? What are some other choices that you could make and try again? Like we try in our martial arts, right? That didn't work. That wasn't effective. My body didn't do to that body what I was hoping it would do. Then I'm going to try again. And so what is the impact you wanted? And is that aligned with the goodness of all people? Kind of check yourself as you go along. And so then, okay, do it again. Yeah. So this giving up because you failed once is, that's white body supremacy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the body is one element, right? The flesh. But embodiment encompasses so much more. In a talk that I got to facilitate, Prentice Hemphill said that your brain is also in your body. So therefore embodiment is also intellectual. Like it exists on so many levels, and to welcome all of those takes practice. I think, as you said, during COVID, a lot of us are having more of that practice because we're uncomfortable. And so that's been super generative in a lot of ways. And also I identified with what you said about being mixed. I'm also mixed. And so those communities, I feel like I'm pulling. It's like, why can't you get along? Why can't you get along? Why can't my own identities get along? And so where you put yourself is so telling of kind of what you're internally struggling with. Because yeah, I can maybe check a box for all these communities, but do I belong there? Do I believe that I belong there? Do I say that I belong there? Do I show up there? And that question is reflected in the work I do. At the very beginning, I said, right, a community liaison. But I'm just trying to get people to get along, and all those things are in my body too. And as I pull them apart, maybe helping others will help me better understand where I'm coming from, or maybe a breakthrough I have internally about myself would be like, oh, that's how to help these people connect. But truly going back, like I process from the body, and that has its benefits, that has its cons, but knowing that embodiment is so many beautiful layers on top of all that intellectually abstract, and knowing that you can approach it from all these different points, but that centering, that embodiment where you actually inhabit yourself in all your beautiful like fashions and ways, and that is what martial arts practices. And it informs a ton of other things, like how we live in society, what our values are. Dedicating that time is what I want folks to pay attention to. You can just have a little 30-second timer when you're washing dishes, just finding your center again, and then continue washing dishes. And so being able to practice that place and space is so important, because when you're under duress in a stressful situation, you're able to return to that faster and work from that point rather than something else, because all of us have the ability, capability, have definitely done harm in the past, but it's about moving forward.
And how you can repair that harm, I think, is a really important skill. But back to what you were saying, I think that a really important practice in martial arts, in all martial arts, is centering, knowing where your center is, rooting, knowing where your root is, and how you're generating power. That root and power, it comes from the earth, and it comes from being in your center, like inhabiting your center. It's an alive connection. It's not just like, oh, there it is on my Google Maps, and I think myself there, and therefore I am. It's not like that, right? So you have to feel it. And it's a return to the feeling of center. And I would say also a return to nourishing an understanding of neutrality. So when we have the ability to return to center, it gives us this reference point where we not like neutral is not just like being dead, but you're not in a reactive state. That's how I see it. Yeah. And so if you're in a non-reactive state and you have cultivated a relationship with neutrality, that means when you've got oncoming traffic, you've got oncoming information, stimulation, you have a reference point that is neutral. Just going back to Prentice Henhill, who both Sam and I just listened to an amazing talk that they did yesterday. We'll send you the link to it, Serian.
Okay, thank you.
Prentice was saying, being centered is not enough, but it's a resource for us. Center is a place to bring our contradictions. Center is a place to bring our questions, our insecurities, and our fears, and what we don't know. That's part of what we're cultivating as we're cultivating center inside of ourselves, in our bodies. As we're discovering that we're incongruent with our values and our practice, center gives us a place to examine that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And pushing back against the neutrality a little, you may center and you're like, yeah, I'm fucking pissed. That's okay. There are a lot of reasons to be angry, but then what are you going to do with that? What is your intention, and what is, like, think about the impact, kind of play it out. And even I struggle a little bit with the word repair, because just like we talked about our injuries, we're not living in the same bodies before that point. We're not living in the same bodies as this morning. Our body is constantly changing. So repair, even in relationships or in action, there's no way to put it back the way it was. It's a totally new connection and relationship. And a goal of repair, I think, maybe focuses too much on what it was rather than what it could be. And there's definitely an acknowledgement of what happened, the harm, and that has to be unpacked. But you get to shape and mold its future too, which is what I find hope in.
I, in working with folks, find that lack of acknowledgement of the past, the lack of the impact, the lack of the harm, of knowing the harm, has stagnated relationships, organizations, and it seems to be the one step that some folks really lack a skill in doing. So I love that you're saying it in this way that is, it shows like the beauty of you as a human, Sam. Like, of course you're going to acknowledge the harm, and then let's think about what we can build, right? Folks struggle recognizing the harm, and I would say the United States as a country is probably the only, maybe there's a few more now that are popping to mind that are refusing to acknowledge the harm of the past. I mean, I'm thinking about Germany as a country and what Germany has done. You say, we will never do that atrocious thing again.
Yeah.
And we continue to remind ourselves when things pop up that look like that this is not who we want to be. Now, there might be groups of people who don't believe in that, but as a society as a whole, there's this memory of the harm. Whereas in the US, there is this mythology around, well, slavery happened and then we ended it. And then some messed up laws happened and then we ended it, And then now we're in sort of post-racial, or whatever it is.
We're colorblind now.
Yeah, we're colorblind, of course. Like, why don't people just get over it, And this is not the people who I hang out with or the circles that I'm in, but this mythology is very strong and is cultural. What happens when your reality is not acknowledged and that it's still perpetuated?
Yeah.
Is really harmful.
Yeah, the invalidation
exactly.
of a real human experience does harm. It does harm to the whole fabric of society.
Absolutely.
How do you reason with something that's irrational? And that's where the wheels turn and you get stuck, because you can't push against a mythology. Like, there's nothing. You can just talk in circles, and that's what's so infuriating, right? Manifest destiny, that was just a huge, like, ego stroke. And thinking of all the native peoples that have lived and are still living on this land, and they're not acknowledged. I mean, through the Americas, the native peoples and the knowledge that they hold and continue to cultivate in their societies, that lack of acknowledgement, because we can be so much better with more shared knowledge that are really important, that you understand this knowledge and history to make informed choices about how you live going forward, Whereas in the US, there are still very much laws in place that tear people apart and break apart minorities and make them fight within each other. Like the difference between how Black people are treated and Indigenous, just how they can prove their Blackness, right? One drop of Black and you're Black and therefore are under this scope of laws, versus Indigenous peoples, you have to prove you have a certain amount of Indigenous DNA. And then you can get a card to say that you're an Indigenous person, when we've totally raped and pillaged your society. So it's, where are you? You're mostly white. Too bad you're not a native person anymore. Seeing how this mythology of the white supremacy that established the United States has gone into law, and how it still separates and oppresses so many folks that live on this land that isn't even ours. And obviously being part of a group that was brought over involuntarily, and then still just both like my Blackness and my Ashkenazi history of like, where do we get to listen and take perspectives and expand and grow into our humanity? That being blocked is confounding to me. Why don't you want to grow? Like, why am I a threat and just have to like muzzle myself in a way that makes you feel comfortable? And that is really confusing.
Yeah.
It's super confusing.
It's super confusing. Just to go back to being mixed race and mixed heritage is a really important ground that you both bring to your experience and your work and the way you interrelate with others. Within you, you have this bridging that you're constantly doing that gives you this ability to be a bridge in the world. You can speak more than one culture. You can speak more than one language. You can speak more than one body language. You know, I kind of consider martial arts like another language. It's a way that we experience and express into the world. And all of those ways are ways of communication. And I think that we are so black and white thinking in this country. Not all countries are like this, but in America, we are.
The harm of the binary.
Yeah. I've been reconciling that within myself. How do I self-identify? And also, how am I seen? And so then what does it mean to call myself mixed race? What does it mean to call myself Black? What does it mean to call myself Tanzanian American? What does it mean? Like, all these identities are very political and send a signal. I mean, I don't know, Sam, if you've had this, where it's just this constant negotiation of like, well, what am I doing when I identify this way? Because a lot of people have a lot of feelings about how I should or should not identify. And at this point, in this time, I'm choosing to say, and I proudly say, I'm Black, because in this society right now, in this climate, and also just how it's actually been since I've arrived here, but just haven't had the consciousness, that's how I'm perceived. And therefore, what I'm standing up for and standing against and fighting for and wanting included is Black bodies having some say in this world and having an ability to be able to be fully present. And I have then light skin privilege as a mixed race person. So it's just like,
the colorism.
Oh my goodness. The colorism. I have privilege because of my light skin, and I am Black in the United States. Now, the minute I land in Tanzania, I am no longer Black.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Tell us about that.
I am way too Western dressing or looking or talking that my mannerisms and even though I was born and raised, speak Swahili fluently, and I'm too light. And off red hair. There's like other racial indicators, like red hair, too light, the way I dress, the way I carry myself. I'm white.
What's centered in Tanzania?
What's centered? That is who's centered versus who has power. That is a whole podcast.
Yeah, that's a complicated question.
Yeah, it's a very complicated question. I grew up depending on who your dad is, so there's like patriarchy and stuff. Yeah.
Wow.
So I'm white.
Okay.
A lot of the time. So this is where I am white a couple months of the year when I go visit my family, and then have some cognitive dissonance and lots of feelings about not belonging in my own home land, and then coming to the US where it's not my home and I'm Black.
It's so political and completely. I think my temper tantrum, I guess, for my whole life is if you're okay with me walking into a room and saying I'm Black, I should be able to walk into a room and say I'm white. And why can't I do that? So I personally acknowledge myself have been saying mixed a lot, but then obviously what Siri mentioned, how you're perceived and being able to play with that and knowing that, right, to get a certain platform, a certain voice, like, oh, I need to like say I'm Black, when that isn't all of me either. Like, I have Blackness, but I've mostly also moved through white spaces in my life. Very aware that I may not belong in those spaces, but I've mostly moved through white spaces. Or even practicing a Japanese martial art. There is a ton of other sexism, and it's a different culture. It's a totally different culture that I have other ideas about what should and shouldn't be in martial arts and held on to. Being told, right, my identities are mutually exclusive. Yeah. I just remember in school, well, I was totally the kid that said Santa wasn't real to a lot of folks when I was very young, because we celebrated Hanukkah, and I knew that Santa gave presents to kids, and I knew that my mom and family gave presents during Hanukkah. But this kid told me, you can't be Jewish because you're Black. And that was just threw me for a loop. Why are those two things? Why don't they ever fit together or overlap in this child's brain? And I swear we were first grade or something. Wow, but it really stuck with me. More what I'm discovering, like having a very liminal existence. I have a foot in the door here, a foot in the door there, but maybe the door is trying to be slammed in my foot to keep me out. I'm not Black enough to be Black. I'm not white enough to be white. So where and what am I? And then, right, having all those languages to move through those spaces where here I have to be this way and here I have to be this way, and totally feeling like changing myself. So rather, I guess through COVID and through these times, I've mostly been trying to offer an authentic part of myself where I may offer different facets of my being, but they always come from a centered place, rather than feeling like I have to like squeeze into a shape that doesn't fit my body, because no defined shape that is offered from someone else will fit you. That is not how we like operate as humans. And that's what our society has really touted as accessible, because it's efficient, right? Like, I get to assign you to these jobs. It's a Brave New World kind of deal. Like, you have a label. And it's great to have labels to communicate our beings to each other, but that label doesn't always have to stick, right? It changes as our bodies change, our brains change. Us as humans, we change. So this is what Sally said last time when we talked, but that fluidity that we're trying to move towards and accept in others and ourselves, I think is truly how our society will develop as well.
Absolutely. I love that you said center. And as you were talking, I was just imagining, what does it mean to be, when we say I'm part this, part that, we just like all dismembered, we're parts, We're all over the place. When center sort of allows for all the contradictions, allows for all the, when you said, we just don't know, we can come back to center. Center, when I'm centered, things that seem very opposing can live in the same room without there being shouting or trying to push someone out. And that's in my body. That's in my body, and what I hope to also hold for others. Yeah. I think of like all these labels are useful, and then white supremacy then ranks all the labels, and so then there's the hierarchy of all the labels and who gets to be on the top and who gets to be more. And then in the activist world, the labels where you become more down if you're XYZ, and it's tiring. I think that's part of it too.
It's exhausting when the system is meant to be exclusive.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're always fighting for your space to belong.
Yeah.
What I hear from you too is that the space that you inhabit, being mixed race heritage and multicultural, you have entry, you've got flow.
So much flow. Much flow.
Just to flip it, right? Because our society is very, in politics is very right, wrong, you're in or you're out. And I experienced this being second generation. So my cross-cultural, being born in America, but my parents were born in Taiwan, and feeling that not even one foot in both worlds. Basically, I'm American. I'm so American. And so that question of belonging, and what space am I allowed to inhabit? That was the mindset I had for so many of my years, is what space am I allowed to inhabit?
Yeah.
And giving other people and other cultures the power to define my allowance instead of inhabiting what I got. I just got it. I didn't ask for this life. I just got it. I'm here. And I'm allowed to inhabit what I've already got. It's not about who allows in or not. Flipping that script for myself was really liberating, because now I feel that I'm allowed to discover who I am. I don't have to be the all-American kid. I'm never going to play that part. I'm never going to look that part. And I'm also never going to speak Chinese fluently. I'm never going to speak Taiwanese fluently. I'm never, I don't have all those cultural understandings. So being in that in-between space, it gives me another kind of advantage where I get to be very curious and explorative and creative. I get to discover. I don't just assume. That has given me like a really interesting life.
I do want to call attention to the fact that Sally has a Wonder Woman shirt on.
Yeah.
Muscles, but that American nature. And as a mixed person, I think growing up, and I'm still figuring this out, but I think growing up as someone who is like multicultural mix, is we were forced to notice the nuances as we move through spaces. And then growing up as a kid, and now too, it feels really heavy because we're very aware of all the different rules at play. And right, Serian mentioned also how we're seen and perceived is very different in all these spaces. So it's this like very multi-tiered chess game of what do I put out? How am I received? If I almost think of it as like, I have this Rolodex of reactions that I kind of play through all the time in my social gymnastics. And what I put out in many places is a very curated version of myself. I have to, pay attention to how that person will interact and engage with me, what they think they're getting back from me. Like it's this whole thing that happens every instant that I'm somewhere else. And kind of taking down those barriers has been really important for me because, right, like you said, I get to be curious in all these circles and try not to make assumptions. But also I've spent a life noticing how people respond to me in all these different places in different ways, because often I'm just kind of other. And also we may not share in everything, but also in our intros, we all said we're queer, which is in so many identities, gender identity, sexual identity. Like queer is a lot. And it's the one I've come to really like because it's a label that is so ill-defined. I'm very happy to have those conversations with people, but I'm trying to maybe not jump to how people will receive me, but also to get that in, to like get into that room, you have to play with a lock. And that takes a very set, coordinated interactions. Or you could kick it down, but you'll be received really differently in that room if you just blast or storm in. You may not get arrested, but you'll be received differently.
What you talk about is the code, when you call code switch, like the code switching and just knowing the code and knowing the nuances of the code and knowing if the lock has got like 7 numbers or if it's got 4 and all of that. And Sally, what it brings up for me is that, I've spent a lot of my time sort of lamenting, feeling this lack of belonging. No matter where I am, I feel this lack of belonging. And also, the more I kind of live the gift of this ability that I have, living within myself, where it's both this deep sadness and incredible celebration of what I can do. It's both the celebration and the sadness. And what then is that third option or the alchemy of it put together? Then what do I do? How do I want to move forward? Being more fully me, centering myself, knowing I can unlock doors when I want to. It's my superpower, like Wonder Woman. Like that's my superpower. And I kind of don't want to have the effort to unlock this door right now.
Yeah. I know, right? The amount of effort that it takes to develop those skills and find the right.
Learn the skill. Like I don't even know I'm doing it. Right. I'm like code switching without, it's in my subconscious at this point where I walk into a room, I don't even know I'm reading. I don't even notice that I'm reading the room.
Mm.
Checking out who's there, what's their race, what gender identity, are there queer folks? Like, how old is everybody? Like all the things, all the mental math, boom, 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 unconscious.
Yeah.
I guess mine is not that. I totally notice. And yeah, I notice when I'm acting differently, how I shift with who I am. And knowing right in the back of my brain, like, so who am I? So there's also folks that notice and celebrate that superpower. Like, wow, you get along with everyone. They're like, okay, cool. Why can't I get along with myself? That would be nice as well.
That's the key.
Yeah, being really sad and angry and trying not to get stuck in it, but also it's totally there.
Mhm.
And then that effort to go through all those doors is just really, really tiring. And that socialization that I was talking about before, where like, yeah, some people may not notice they're acting in a certain way, where I feel like I've had to play with those relationships and interactions so much. It's very present and at the forefront of my mind, how I'm interacting and also why. Maybe not to like a long-term goal, but why? Because I see in this other person, oh, when I said that, they kind of, I don't know, they stepped back a little, they turned slightly. Like that calculating nature, I'm very mental in that way. That's why I try to return to my body and process things, because my mind tends to catastrophize. I'll think about someone's interaction for a long time after and try to figure out why they did that, what I said that led to that, kind of the cause. And
It's a lot of energy, isn't it?
so much energy.
It's a lot of headspace. It's a lot of emotional investment. It's a lot of caretaking.
Yes.
Yes.
It is a lot of caretaking of other people's comfort is the crux of what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
I can empower myself and think of myself as the key man in the matrix. I walk around with all the keys to all the doors.
Yeah.
That gives me some privileges, but yeah, it's a weight too. To have to suss that out everywhere I go.
And I want to be okay not having to get along with everyone. I can accept you as human, but I don't want my getting along with you to impact my safety.
It's been a catalyzing year for sure.
Yeah.
We've had to make choices. We've had to clarify our values. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I've learned a lot about myself. When you were talking in the beginning about our spiritual practices, and it's really enabled me to really root down and practice at a much deeper level than I think I would have had otherwise.
Yeah, Serian, I know that you do some ancestral work. Talking about that place of belonging, we're talking about belonging in the alive culture in this lifetime.
Yeah.
How do you use ancestral work as part of our cultivation of belonging, knowing where we came from? Who are your ancestors that you really connect with?
Oh my goodness. It's so funny that not funny, but it's so great that you asked that question. People who really know me would say that I have such an easier time connecting to spirit than I do to the natural plane. So the sense of belonging with ancestors for me is this sweet, delicious, I'm almost going to cry. I feel so able to be my full self and fully accepted and fully celebrated and be in community in ways with my ancestors and with spirit that I spend a lot of time there, actually, because it's so feeding. The ancestors that are very alive right now are Leti, my middle name. She's a warrior who fought the Germans during colonization in Tanzania, and she dressed as a man and she fought the Germans.
Is she your blood relation?
She's my blood relation, maybe 3 or 4 generations. She's almost like a myth at this point, so it's difficult to tell like what's real and what's not, but it's all real. It's all real. She's that big. And she's ingenious. She's a strategist. She's cunning. She's very truthful. So being with her is very important for me at this time. Very Tanzanian, very Nyaturu. I'm going to be specific. Comes from the Nyaturu tribe. I'll take up too much time if I might go with everybody. But Professor Call, who was the founder of our school, is a spirit adopted ancestor who I go to also. I have my grandfather who passed before I was born, who was the survivor of the Holocaust. So I have both German, who occupied my people, and who were in me and the Nyaturu people who fought the Germans inside my body and as ancestors, which is a contradiction that we can all hang out with and be okay with and see our humanity, which is hopeful. And then I have protectors that have shown up as spirit guides who I call also. So I find that my ancestors are such a critical part of my existence. And I know.
Are you an introvert or are you just keeping different company? You seem to really like to be around these folks.
Great question.
Oh my, I'm speechless. That is so true. I had not thought. It's just maybe the company that I keep that just is extroverted in the spirit realm.
Yeah, I'm an introvert. I like to hermit. It's an effort. I like the genuine kind of deep connections that I find. Like this conversation is really fruitful, flourishing. I am going to take a lot of ideas and ruminate on them and reflect. It's the small talk that is tiring. I just have to figure out how to have the capacity to go through that.
Yeah, I think that we three introverts keep good company.
Oh, I saw a meme today which said, this is me when I meet another introvert. We're super extroverted when we meet other introverts.
Yeah, the company that you choose to keep, you're talking about your ancestors and the spirits, and you feel the most belonging. You can be your whole self when everybody's in the room. And I feel the same way with my chosen family. Blood family, but also chosen family, I think is really crucial. The company that we keep around us can be really healing and reflect us back to ourselves. Often society doesn't reflect ourselves either at all or not fully back to ourselves if we're not in the center of society. So we need those people around us.
Yeah. And that's something that I think that we can all take really from the queer community, this chosen family. That's been so helpful, like who you surround yourself with, because if you do have those other kind of identities, it's important to be in an environment that nourishes you. It's not to say it's without conflict, because, right, as we said, conflict is generative. It's just question whether that conflict is a literal risk to your, not just well-being, but life. So chosen family, who we choose to surround ourselves with, rather than folks that may dampen us or restrict us in a way that suppresses and oppresses us. But my question is, that chosen family, do we kind of burn down the old system and kind of go ahead anew in another way, this counterculture? Or do we spend all this time, energy, and capacity trying to fix something where at its roots may not be something we want to continue to grow? And that's what I'm struggling with. I have all these projects where we're going in a new direction. It's really cool, but this current system is still harming and hurting so many people. Yeah. So what do you fix? What patches do you make to put a pause on the harm, just to like figure out and have time to create something new, which can't be rushed?
It's a really complicated inquiry. I think that the world is going through that inquiry right now. We have to find the values that we want to fight for and find the best systems that are close enough fit for us to be able to generate those values through. Yeah, it's complicated.
I think of going back to a tiny bit to the spiritual practice is that my practice believes in destiny, believes in your higher self, your Ori. What are we uniquely meant to do also? And how to bring those gifts to elevate all people. That's a tenet of the practice. And I think where I've kind of maybe lost my way is thinking, okay, there's all these things that need to be fixed, and what's the right thing to do? And do I just try to create this different thing over here? I'm like, well, what is the thing that I am innately, without a lot of effort? I mean, effort is there, but right effort, where I'm not banging my head against the wall so much, and that I'm enjoying the work or feel that I value the work. And in the heartbreak of it all, and in the frustration of it all, it's still the work I still want to do. And getting closer to that, so that my contribution is elevating of whatever it is that this new transformation that is definitely on its way, like it needs to happen. It's on its way. That what's my part in that? That's really aligned with who I am as a person. That's also been the gift of COVID in some ways, of just finding that, a lot more details around that.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that back as we're rounding out our conversation, just talking about self-care and sustainability. It's a very energizing time and it requires a lot of energy to be active. And there's so much internal work that is required to change culture. True grassroots, it's like you got to go down to the seed.
Yes.
It is in us. We are not just a single individual. We're talking about generations and generations ahead of us.
Yeah.
And if you're in contact with the ancestrals, we're also healing our ancestral line.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we're all in this dialogue that is beyond the space and time that we're in. And how do we sustain ourselves through this time? Because this is a life practice. So just like martial arts is a life practice.
Taking time where I know that it's really tiring for me to be around folks, like being able to schedule a camping trip or to read a book is really important. Getting enough sleep is something that I'm constantly battling.
Yeah.
And what Serian said, that point where my contributions aren't aiding kind of my goal, my values, and they're hurting my being, like that's when I need to go to sleep. I'm not going to bang out this essay at 3 a.m. after a previous night of 4 a.m. That's not what's going to help me or everything else. And accepting where my capacity is and being communicative about my capacity to the people and folks that I engage with, knowing where everyone is so important, because COVID, I think, as we're learning, has graced us with a lot of space for growth. And I think where it gets difficult is a lot of people are attacking others because they're not doing it the right way, but also none of it is. We're never going to, like, as an individual, do something the perfect right way. And that's not something to chase because it's not feasible or achievable. And so being like giving the gift of space to grow and learn, and that happens through practice and engagement. So choosing to come in and do something where, like, you may have the best intentions, right? And there may be harm in your impact, but very embracing and accepting like that impact and acknowledging it and moving forward and just keep on trotting. And also, like, that stillness is still something. So paradox, obviously. So finding that stillness while constantly moving forward, because you are growing in that moment of like stillness, you're expanding and growing. So it never stops. It just may take on a different form.
I'd say it's ever evolving self-care. And the thing that I've been doing in the last few months is really looking at the tenets of white supremacy and looking at what part of white supremacy am I replicating? Because white supremacy is tiring in itself. So am I hanging on to perfection right now when I can just kind of let it go? Am I feeling something is urgent that it's really not? Am I feeling I'm not qualified and that I'm an imposter? What is it that's actually sucking my energy? Then I can replace it with something else. Like, can I rest? I mean, resting is part of work. Like, you can't keep going. It's just anywhere else in Tanzania. Oh, we rest so well. You know, we're good resters. You know, we know how to do it tomorrow instead of today. Sometimes if I actually stop and pause and being like, I'm replicating the tenets of or the behaviors of white supremacy right now. Yeah, I'm not
design, right?
It's part of the design. I'm going to do that because this is the soup we swim in. Right? Yeah, the TBD, the too busy disorder. You know, it's like, do I need to do that? And is that really in service? Some things need to be urgent because it's urgent.
Yeah. But
some things don't. And so it's been helpful for me. And I realized actually I have more space. And my newest one, it's as of 3 days ago, is do the thing you're doing. Don't do the other thing, you know? And I realize I have so much more energy when I just do the thing. And then don't do more if you don't need to do more, because that's not necessary.
Yeah, instead of multitasking, single
task. I'm so much better at single tasking.
I think a lot of us are, actually, but we're just incredibly distracted. Yeah. It's been helpful for me to think about rhythm as opposed to just a one-way street of pace. Where everything is urgent, because urgency is not sustainable. But it's a catalyst. This whole year has been very catalyzing. But cultivating rest. I've also had issues with my sleep this year. I don't usually, I have in other times of my life, but the constant grinding, the internal processing, the trauma that's been brought up, the anxiety, the worries, whether it's about me or my family, or there's so much to be activated about and to think about having a rhythm that's more like a sine wave or a tide, that there's in time and there's out time. And it's really important, I think, especially for introverts, to have that solitude, to have that non-stimulated time, to be quiet is very restorative for introverts. And there are a lot more introverts in the world than are seen, just to let you know, people out there listening. We have a very extroverted, people are rewarded for being extroverted in our culture. It's not the same in every culture. In Asia, it might not be the same.
Yeah.
Just to be able to claim my own rhythm. And I think part of the teaching of this COVID time was that the world slowed down and people were able to see the benefit of it. A lot of people struggled against it. For me, I felt like in a way it gave me this space where I was allowed to be alone and not just be producing.
Yeah, definitely. Holding your space with kindness, or just rather than planting yourself here and being angry at anyone that encroaches or tries to shift or change you. You can hold space really, really well and establish a barrier, right, with kindness. And I think that's been really hard in COVID, not even just kind of the protests that have been going on, but with family that you love and want to see, but maybe can't because they're not being as careful as you are or as you'd like to be, or just accepting of those barriers and the kindness that you can put into those interactions is what I've been trying to do.
That's beautiful. And I'd like to just wrap it up with one last question about what was in your recent life that you found really delightful?
With delight, I go to my senses, and my partner very thoughtfully went grocery shopping, but he brought back a new tea that smelled amazing. And I was excited about it from the get-go. He pointed to it. He's like, hey, this is our new decaf tea for nighttime.
Ooh.
And I smelled it and was excited. And the water boiled. And I was like, oh, I get to try this tea. I tried the tea. And let me tell you, it's amazing. It's very spicy. It has a ton of cloves and it's warming, and feeling that go through my mouth and into my chest and cuddling up with it. And I have a mega mug. It's about the size of my head. So hugging this tankard, this warm tankard to my body, and feeling that warmth from the tea expand through my hands and up my arms, and tasting it as it goes down and nourishes me without caffeine because it's nighttime. That was my delight from yesterday.
Oh, that sounds so good.
It's a really good tea.
I want to know what the tea is. Maybe let me know afterwards.
It's a loose leaf that was at the supermarket, so I can't even tell you.
Wow. Secret sauce.
Secret
tea.
How about you, Serian?
Oh, it's really hard to come up with just one thing. But the one that not only brought me delight, but was the first time I ever seen anything like it, and was it very extraordinary, that I have a garden outside that I take great pride in, and it's overgrown. It's got lots of everything, food, flowers, and everything. And I grow plants specifically to attract hummingbirds and butterflies. So I have a pollinator garden. Very, very happy that it's visited very frequently by pollinators. Today, I was walking out right before our call today, and I saw a dragonfly, which I see very seldom, but I do see them. And then I saw a bunch of moths during the day, and then I saw a hummingbird. I saw a moth chase a hummingbird, and then the dragonfly was chasing the hummingbird. These three species were like doing something extraordinary that I've never seen in my life. And I was about to text my sister, and I'm like, okay, just enjoy the moment. You don't need to tell anyone you saw it, right? Here you're asking me about it.
Telling everyone that you saw it.
I'm not telling everybody that I saw it.
Well, thanks for telling us about it. That's amazing. Thank you both so much for carving out the time for today and being fully in this conversation. It's been really a joy speaking with you.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you,
much,
Sally. It's been so much fun. And Serian, I love talking
Sam.
with you.
It's just great.
Thanks, everybody. The Warriors for Peace podcast is a branch of Evergreen Taiji Academy. Support more conversations like these by becoming a member. Find out more at patreon.com/Evergreen Taiji. That's Evergreen Taiji. Our online practice community is a resource for your internal cultivation. Join us.